Let the silence of the past settle in your mind. Tonight, we travel far away across sand-swept deserts and through incense-scented streets to the golden cities of medieval Arabia. The world of the Abbasid Caliphate was a world of paradoxes, lavish yet restrictive, poetic yet tightly controlled, devout yet quietly brimming with forbidden longings. Perhaps you've heard of Baghdad during its golden age, with its soaring minarets, dazzling scholars, and bustling marketplaces. But tonight, we won't be walking with philosophers or mathematicians. Instead, we'll slip quietly through the shaded doorways and behind the curtained walls into the hidden chambers where hearts beat quietly under heavy silks, where poems whispered what the law forbade. This is not a tale of great battles or sweeping empires. It's about the slow, quiet ache of longing, about women who watched the world through wooden lattice screens, about men who fell in love with phantoms of virtue and restraint, about a society that celebrated love in verse but condemned it in practice. So settle in. Let the flicker of ancient oil lamps guide you. Let the rhythm of history lull your thoughts. And imagine yourself not as a ruler or warrior, but as someone ordinary. A woman behind a carved door, a scribe with ink-stained fingers, a young man dreaming of a woman whose name he must never say aloud. Let us begin with the world she lived in. Segment 1. Hijabs, house arrest, and harsh rules. Love as a woman in Abbasid Baghdad. Imagine waking with the light not from the sun on your face, but from the filtered glow that slips through the mashrabia screen, casting soft wooden shadows across your room. You are a young woman in Abbasid Baghdad. The year is 830 CE, and outside, the streets are waking, merchants calling out their wares, water carriers chanting softly, the low hum of donkeys' hooves against packed earth. But you do not step outside. Your world is enclosed, a courtyard, a shaded room, a rooftop garden perhaps. But the main thoroughfare, the bookstore, the poetry recital, those are not for you. Not without a male escort, not without layers of fabric veiling not only your face, but your intentions. This was not the case for all women in medieval Islam. Wealth, class, and family standing shaped one's freedom. But for many women of the Abbasid period, particularly those of the urban, middle and upper classes' life was a tapestry of restrictions carefully stitched by social expectation and reinforced by religious interpretation. The word hijab in Arabic, in its original form, meant more than just a piece of cloth. It meant barrier or separation. And in this time, it referred not only to dress, but to space, who could be seen, who could be heard, who could move freely. Marriage, for most women, came early, often by age 14 or 15. A father or a male guardian arranged it, sometimes consulting the girl, sometimes not. A woman might never have seen her husband before the wedding day, or if she had, it was from behind a screen, or perhaps in passing during a family visit. Once married, her world narrowed even more. The husband might be kind or distant, generous or stern, but he held legal power. He controlled the keys to her social world. Visits to her natal family, permission to attend a wedding, even walking in the garden, these became things she needed approval for. And love? Love was not required. In fact, it was rarely expected. A woman's duty was not to fall in love, it was to maintain honor. Her modesty, her silence, her stillness were all considered virtues. To be too expressive, too visible, too warm, these were potential signs of impropriety, the kind that could shame a household or stain a family name. Still, behind these walls, women carved out small kingdoms of their own. The home was their realm, and many became queens within it, managing servants, overseeing finances, raising children, and cultivating the arts of cooking, embroidery, and even when permitted, reading or composing poetry. Some women, in rare cases, had access to tutors or could learn from male relatives. A few even became respected scholars or mystics, but this was the exception, not the rule. But the experience of desire, that soft ache for connection, was not so rare. She might feel it in the stillness of the night, listening to a neighbor's ud echoing through the courtyard, or while watching a favorite cousin recite verses too passionate for mere friendship, or perhaps in secret letters passed through trusted servants' short, coded notes carrying enormous emotional weight. She was not without agency. A woman could, in theory, initiate divorce under certain circumstances. She could negotiate her mahr, her bridal gift, before marriage. She could inherit property, though the portions were smaller than a man's, but in the realm of romance, her choices were thin. Even speaking openly of desire could be dangerous. Too bold, and it might invite punishment or worse, scandal. So how did love survive? It retreated into poetry, into dreams, into gardens, journals, whispered songs. And sometimes it slipped past the barriers. A maid might smuggle a letter. A borrowed book might hide a pressed flower. A rooftop visit might become a moment of confession. But each of these came with risks, social, familial, and even legal. To love, as a woman in Abbasid Baghdad, was to risk everything for something that might never be returned. To hope in silence, to watch through wooden screens, to live half seen, half heard, but still deeply feeling. Let your thoughts linger here for a while in this gentle, private space. The rustling of linen, the coolness of stone under bare feet, the sound of a distant call to prayer, and when you're ready, we'll drift to another story. A love that was so pure it became legend, and yet the lovers never once touched. Layla and Majnun, the Middle Eastern Romeo and Juliet, who never touched. Let your mind slow, your breath soften. Now, imagine a vast and quiet desert. The air is still, the dunes roll like waves frozen in time. There's no sound but the soft hush of wind brushing sand over stone. And in the distance, small, moving, there is a solitary figure. Barefoot, cloaked in rags, eyes hollow with longing. His name is Kays, but history remembers him by another name. A name that means madman, Majnun. His story is one of the most famous love tales in the Islamic world. A tale so enduring that it found its way into countless languages: Arabic, Persian, Turkish, Urdu, and eventually even to Europe. It is the story of Layla and Majnun, two souls who loved so fiercely, so completely, and so chastely that their love was considered both divine and dangerous. Let us walk slowly through their story. Kays and Layla met as children in the simple setting of a school, perhaps a modest room shaded by woven reeds, where boys and girls once learned side by side in early childhood. There, Kays saw her, Layla, whose name means night. Dark-haired, sharp-eyed, with a presence that made even silence feel full. He loved her immediately, and from that moment forward, the rhythm of his life changed. He composed verses in her name, whispered her name into the dust, wrote her beauty into poems so haunting that passers-by would stop to listen, hearts tightening at the sorrow laced within them. But love, in their society, was not something to be sung so publicly. Layla's family, alarmed by the intensity of his obsession, forbade their union. They feared the shame, the scrutiny, the instability his wild verses brought. To speak of a woman so freely, even in metaphor, was a form of social transgression. And so Layla was married to another, a man of status, one who offered stability, wealth, and silence. Majnun Kays did not fight. He did not steal her away or raise his voice. He simply walked into the wilderness. He wandered the deserts alone. He rejected food, comfort, and shelter. He lived among animals, speaking only in verse. His love had transformed him. He was no longer Kays, the man. He had become Majnun, the mad one. His thoughts were with Layla, always, though they would never meet again. And Layla? She lived her life behind closed doors, a prisoner of her own heart. Though married, she refused to love her husband. She read Majnun's poems in secret. She wept at night, her tears staining the pillow. And though she was surrounded by luxury and servants, she lived in quiet mourning for a love she never touched, but never released. Their story ends not in reunion, but in death. Layla died young. Some say it was from heartbreak. Majnun, upon hearing the news, went to her grave and never left it. He was found there days later, lifeless, at peace. The tale of Layla and Majnun is more than a romantic tragedy. It is a window into a culture where love could be sacred but also dangerous, where poetry became the only safe space for desire, where lovers could be praised as martyrs of the heart, yet condemned by law and custom. In a society where modesty was paramount, theirs was a love stripped of touch, of closeness, even of shared glances. Yet somehow it burned brighter than many loves born of physical closeness. It was a love that transcended flesh, elevated suffering into beauty, and made longing into art. Majnun's verses, echoing across centuries, gave shape to an entire genre of mystical love poetry. Sufi thinkers saw in his madness a kind of divine yearning, an allegory for the soul's desire for the eternal. The beloved, untouchable, became a symbol of the divine itself. And in quiet rooms across the Abbasid world, women and men alike read their story by lamplight. They read it and understood. For in their own way, many lived echoes of this tale, loving from afar, longing in silence, dreaming through verse. So if you lie awake tonight, feeling the quiet ache of something unsaid, something unfelt, know that you're not alone. Across time, in the rustle of paper, in the hum of desert wind, in the stillness between prayers, that feeling has lived on. And now, with your breath slow and steady, we will move from whispered poems to something even more intimate. In the shadows of the Abbasid libraries and in private collections guarded from the eyes of the devout, another form of passion flourished, seduction on the page. The world of erotic manuscripts and poetic longing. Close your eyes if you wish and imagine yourself seated on a cushion in the cool, shaded corner of a courtyard. Around you, the scent of jasmine wafts through the air. A jug of pomegranate wine rests nearby, not forbidden in its private circle, and in your lap, a book, not just any book. A book that could not be read aloud in polite company. You open it slowly. The pages are soft with age, the script carefully formed by a practiced scribe's hand. The words within are tender, clever, at times startling. This is not theology. It is not law. It is love, longing, desire, described with elegance. This is the hidden world of Abbasid erotica and seduction. While the Abbasid Caliphate is often remembered for its scholars, its mathematicians, its astronomers, and physicians, it also harbored a quieter, more shadowed tradition. In libraries tucked behind palace walls, and in salons hosted by daring poets, there lived a literature that spoke not of battles nor empires, but of bodies, of kisses, glances, and nights that faded into the call to prayer. It was not open. It was not spoken aloud in mosques or among the elite in court, but it was there, always there, living in poetry, in whispered riddles, and in private collections passed through trusted hands. One of the most famous of these works was a book known as the Encyclopedia of Pleasure, or Jami al-Ida, written by the lesser-known scholar Al-Tifinshk in the 13th century, just beyond the Abbasid peak. It was a collection of stories, medical theories, and intimate advice. It covered both heterosexual and homosexual relationships, unusual for its time and its boldness. But even earlier, during the Abbasid height, the seeds of such writing were everywhere. Poets like Abu Nuwas reveled in breaking the rules. His verses celebrated wine, sensuality, and the beauty of youth. He praised the curve of a cheek, the delight of forbidden meetings, and the mischief of sneaking behind closed doors. His tone was both playful and provocative. His work was so influential that later scholars would alternately preserve and attempt to erase it, depending on the mood of the era. But even beyond the more brazen poets, erotic themes found subtler homes. Love manuals emerged during the Abbasid era, often disguised as medical or philosophical texts. They included advice on how to win affection, how to sustain desire, and how to read the body not only for health, but for pleasure. Some were adaptations of earlier Greek, Persian, or Indian works, translated into Arabic and infused with Islamic nuance. The most famous among them was likely The Perfumed Garden, or Al-Rad al-Atar, penned in the later 15th century in the Maghreb, but based on Abbasid traditions. It included not only descriptions of physical love, but long passages on emotional connection, romantic strategies, and the importance of mutual delight. To modern ears, this may seem surprising, startling even, that such a deeply religious and structured society had room for open, even graphic, discussions of love and sex. But context is key. Public behavior in the Abbasid world was tightly regulated. Modesty, honor, and religious propriety were woven into daily life. Yet in private, and particularly in literary culture, there was more nuance. The physical world was not seen as inherently sinful, but as something to be mastered, refined, and appreciated. Carefully, many works included spiritual metaphors. The beloved's face was like the moon. The experience of longing was like thirst in a dry land. A single glance could be likened to divine revelation. Desire, when expressed poetically, became something elevated, something spiritualized. This is not to say it was universally accepted. Works were sometimes banned, poets punished, manuscripts burned, but others were protected, even commissioned by nobles who wished to explore this other side of human experience. And women, too, were not absent from this literary world. While fewer female poets' voices survive, some do appear. The most famous is Walada bint al-Mustakfi, a noblewoman from Al-Andalus during the tail end of the Abbasid influence in Spain. Her verses were bold, unapologetic, and openly sensual. She held salons in Cordoba and wore poetry embroidered into her garments. One line famously sewn onto her robe read, "I walk proudly, for I am independent and strong. I go my own way, and I delight in my freedom." It is likely that many more women wrote in private, sharing verses in courtly gatherings, slipping lines into correspondence, crafting couplets under male pseudonyms. And so, amid the calligraphy and carved wood of Abbasid Baghdad, a quiet culture of longing persisted, not only in feeling, but in form, in literature. Manuscripts were wrapped in silk and tied with cord, read by lamplight, hidden in travel bags, shared between lovers or friends, or read in solitude when the walls felt too tight and the heart too restless. Desire in the Abbasid world was rarely open, but it was not absent. It lived in the spaces between rules, in metaphor, in ink, and in the way a poem could say everything, without ever saying it directly. Now, let the soft shuffle of parchment fade from your ears. The verses are returned to their pages, the ink dried, the candle burned low. And as we close the cover of that hidden book, let us turn toward the golden palaces. Behind the silk screens and jeweled doors of the caliph's harem, passion became power and love became a calculated risk. The palace rises like a dream above the city of Baghdad. Its domes glitter under the sun, its walls veined with marble and turquoise. But behind the outer courtyards, beyond the golden archways and elaborate calligraphy, lies a quieter world, a world of guarded doors, veiled windows, and constant watching. This is the caliph's harem. The word harem often conjures misconceptions, images drawn from later Orientalist fantasy rather than historical reality. In the Abbasid court, The harem was not simply a place of pleasure. It was a fortress of control, a system of power, and a world governed by unspoken rules. Step softly now. Imagine yourself walking its inner halls. The air is cool. A fountain murmurs in the center of a tiled courtyard. The scent of rose water lingers on polished wood. Light enters in slits and slants carefully filtered through screens, never flooding, never fully exposing. Here live the women of the caliph. Some are wives chosen for their lineage, their political alliances. Others are concubines taken as gifts, purchased from distant lands, or raised within the court itself. Many are enslaved, but some will one day wield more influence than any vizier. Because in the harem, proximity to the caliph is power, and affection can shift the balance of empires. It is a world that is at once enclosed and expansive. Within these walls lived hundreds of women, often thousands, alongside their servants, tutors, eunuchs, and children. Every woman's status was carefully marked. Her chambers, her garments, her attendants, all reflected her position in the court's invisible hierarchy. At the top might be the Walad, a concubine who had borne a child for the caliph, especially if it was a son. She could not be sold, and her son might one day wear the crown. Below her were favored companions, entertainers, musicians, poets. Then came those who served or waited, always hoping for a summons that might change their lives. But life in the harem was not soft. It was political, competitive. Each woman watched the others. Alliances were formed quietly, through shared gossip, gifts, or whispered prayers. Jealousy simmered beneath the surface. A single evening's favor might mean advancement or ruin. Yet even here, amid the quiet luxury, passion bloomed. Sometimes it was real sincere affection between a caliph and a concubine. Sometimes it was calculated, love performed for survival. And sometimes it was forbidden intimacies between women or secret longing for someone outside the palace walls. We know fragments of these stories not because they were recorded in official histories, but because they leaked through poetry, rumor, or the memoirs of travelers and eunuchs. The harem was, after all, a place designed to be unseen. A place where men, except for the ruler and his loyal eunuchs, were strictly forbidden. Eunuchs played a critical role here. Often taken as boys and castrated, sometimes voluntarily, more often not, they became guardians of the harem. Their liminal status, neither man nor fully outside the court, made them ideal intermediaries. Some rose to immense power, acting as go-betweens, messengers, and even military commanders. And though they had access to the women's world, their own lives were equally restricted, marked by a complex mix of privilege and pain. As for the caliph himself, his heart in bed was a source of endless intrigue. Some caliphs fell deeply in love. Harun al-Rashid, perhaps the most famous of all, was said to have adored his concubine Murayda, who bore him the future Caliph al-Mun. Their love story appears in both sober chronicles and romanticized tales, blending fact with legend. Others treated their harems more like chessboard tools to secure loyalty, to reward service, or to display opulence. A new concubine from a distant region might signify alliance or conquest. A favor withdrawn might ruin a family. Love, in such a place, was complicated. Even a single night could change a woman's life. She might become the mother of a prince. She might be forgotten by morning. Or she might fall into the web of palace politics, used, manipulated, maneuvered. Some women, however, played the game well. A few became queen mothers, known as al-Khalifa, wielding extraordinary influence. These women advised their sons, brokered alliances, and even directed court appointments. They were no longer veiled in shadows, they were power behind the throne. Still, for most women, the harem remained a golden cage. Beautiful, controlled, and inescapable. They might spend decades without ever seeing the outside world. Their relationships were limited to those within the palace walls. There lives a cycle of waiting, watching, wondering. And through it all, the heart continued to feel, to hope, to grieve. Imagine now a quiet chamber where a young woman, barely 16, writes verses by candlelight. She is literate, rare for her time, and she has memorized the poems of Layla and Majnun. She thinks of the caliph who passed her by. She wonders if he will remember her name. She wonders if he ever knew it. She seals her poem in a small chest. She hides it behind a tapestry, and she waits. These were not fairy tales. These were lives. Confined, complex, and often silent in the official record. But tonight, we remember them. And as we step gently away from the caliph's palace, we return to the city, to the quiet homes and law courts where marriage less passionate, more practical was the order of the day. The candle flickers low. A scribe sits cross-legged on a mat of woven reeds, carefully dipping his pen into ink made of soot and water. In front of him, a scroll of parchment waits. At his side, a man and a woman's father discuss terms calmly, precisely. There's little laughter, no glances between bride and groom. This is not the space for love. This is the marriage contract. In medieval Abbasid society, marriage was not merely a spiritual or romantic bond, it was a legal agreement. It joined not just two individuals, but two families, two sets of expectations, and often two economic strategies. And it was governed by Islamic law in minute detail. For women, this contract was one of the few legal documents in which their rights were explicitly stated. And yet, those rights existed within limits, drawn by custom, shaped by status, and interpreted by men. Let us pause here. Imagine yourself as a young woman in Baghdad. Your family is modest, perhaps a merchant household. You are of marrying age, likely in your mid-teens. There have been discussions in hushed tones. A suitor has been suggested. You have seen him perhaps once from behind a screen. You've heard he is steady, not cruel. That alone is something. Your father meets with the suitor's father, or perhaps in wealthier homes with a legal expert to arrange the mahr, the mandatory bridal gift. This is not a dowry paid to the husband, but rather a financial promise to the bride herself. A kind of security. It may be gold, livestock, clothing, or coin. It may be paid immediately or pledged for later. This mahr becomes yours, and it cannot be taken away. The marriage contract, Asdi al-Niko, lays out the terms, the amount of mahr, the husband's obligations, and occasionally additional conditions. A woman might stipulate that she remain in her city, that her husband not take additional wives, or that she retain control over certain property. These conditions were rare, but they were not unheard of. If the woman is a widow or divorcee, she may negotiate directly. If she is a virgin, her guardian must approve the match. In many cases, this guardian was her father. In his absence, a male relative. And while Islamic law required her consent, the practice varied. A young woman's silence was often taken as agreement. The ceremony itself was simple. No elaborate procession. No exchange of vows. A few witnesses, the signing of the contract, and the recitation of the Fatiha, the opening verse of the Quran. Then the union was complete. Only after this might the groom see his bride unveiled. In some cases, only on the wedding night. Romance was not required, but over time it might grow. Many couples came to care deeply for one another. Shared daily life, children, hardship, all these forged bonds. Yet even in such households, expressions of affection were often quiet. Subtle, a shared glance over morning bread, a poem left on a pillow, a new shawl laid gently at her feet. But not all marriages were tranquil. Men held the right of talaq, unilateral divorce. A man could divorce his wife by pronouncing the words 3 times. He owed her the deferred portion of her mahr. She returned to her father's home. In wealthier circles, a woman might move into a separate residence supported by the former husband. Women had narrower paths to divorce. They could petition a judge for coel, a form of divorce in which the woman offered financial compensation to end the union. Grounds might include cruelty, neglect, or inability to provide. But proving these was difficult. Social pressure discouraged women from taking such steps unless they had powerful support. And what of love outside marriage? Illicit relationships carried great risk. Adultery or zina was a serious offense under Islamic law, punishable by lashing or even stoning, though in practice, evidence requirements were strict. Still, social repercussions alone were enough to destroy reputations and lives. Because of this, most longing was quiet, private, expressed through letters, glances, or poetry. Some scholars, interestingly, debated whether passionate love was inherently harmful. Some argued it was a kind of madness. Others believed it could purify the soul. But none denied its power to disrupt the orderly fabric of society. In this way, marriage contracts were not just documents, they were barriers. Barriers meant to contain emotion, to safeguard lineage, to prevent scandal. Within their lines, desire was permitted. Beyond them, it became dangerous. And yet, even within those rules, people found ways to feel. An old woman might remember the way her husband looked at her when she laughed. A young man might recall the first time his wife sang while cooking. A divorced woman might trace her finger over the edge of her jewelry tokens of a time that was hers, however briefly. These were quiet histories, domestic, legal, intimate. And as we drift away from this world of ink and parchment, of dowries and whispered prayers, let us return once more to the broader picture, to a time when love was sacred yet restrained, when longing lived behind screens and within verse, when passion was a problem but also a prayer. And now we return. The candles have burned low. The scrolls are rolled, the door is latched, and the ink has long dried. The sounds of bustling markets, of whispered poems, of distant call to prayer, all fade into the hush of sleep. We have wandered slowly through the shadowed rooms of Abbasid Baghdad, where hearts ached behind carved screens, and love was a language spoken carefully, if at all. We met the women of the household, whose modesty was both armor and confinement. We listened to the silent tragedy of Layla and Majnun, lovers untouched yet eternally entwined. We turned the pages of forgotten manuscripts, where poets dared to write what society dared not say. We stepped softly through the marble halls of the harem, where desire danced with ambition, and affection had a price. And we sat quietly with the scribes and fathers, watching lives shaped by contracts and compromise, hope and hesitation. Through it all, one thing remained constant: the human longing for closeness, for understanding, for love. In the Abbasid world, love was not simple. It was governed by law, shaped by language, often hidden behind duty. But it was never absent. It lived in the quiet, in poems tucked into sleeves, in sighs held behind veils, and glances stolen through wooden screens. Tonight, as you lie in stillness, you might feel the echo of those same emotions, gentler now, softened by time. You live in a world where love may come more freely, where voices are heard more clearly, where choices can be made with fewer consequences. And yet, some part of you still understands that ache, the slow, quiet pull of longing. Let it soothe you now. Let the history drift into dream. Let the soft rhythm of memory carry you. Let the sounds of ancient Baghdad become distant, like the last notes of an ode played in a courtyard just before dawn. You are safe, you are still, and the past is sleeping too. Good night.